When I was 7 years old, I had my first encounter with magic. Like pretty much every other kid my age, I was reading Harry Potter. And after just one book, I couldn't stop imagining what it would be like to use magic myself. 20 years later, and not much has changed. Except now, instead of just experiencing magic systems, I'm trying to create my own. There's only one problem. My last magic system was about as effective as the Bay of Pigs invasion. That reference is still relevant. Safe to say, I don't want to make the same mistakes again. That's why I'm looking to Brandon Sanderson's magic for answers. With one amazing magic system after another, Brandon Sanderson is the undisputed king of magic. So in the next 4 days, my goal is to analyze Brandon Sanderson's magic systems, figure out what makes them work, and apply these lessons to a magic system of my own. And hopefully create a magic of the type I was so engrossed with as a kid. So I figured a good first place to start would be to review Sanderson's laws. I already know them from watching the lectures and various things by Brandon Sanderson, but I never actually read the essays. So that's what I'm going to start with. I'm just going to read through these essays and see what I can learn. And then when I have this base understanding of the way that Brandon Sanderson views magic systems, I will start to analyze his magic systems and figure out the finer details and preferences and whatnot. So let's start here with Sanderson's first law. That was actually really interesting, and I did learn some interesting things about the way that Brandon Sanderson approaches magic systems from reading these essays. I would recommend that you read over these essays yourself because I found them really useful, but here's a basic summary so you can understand each of the laws while we continue. And now that I've done this, I feel like I'm ready to continue on with the main part of this research and trying to dive into them deeply and figure out what elements make these magic systems work. And as we do this analysis, the magic systems we are going to be focusing on are Surge Binding and Allomancy. The reason why is because those are the two that I have actually read. I have not read Warbreaker yet, although I heard the magic system is really cool in that, and I would like to read it. I'm trying to make sure I'm not reading like 100 different series at the same time. So I am ready to start analyzing these two magic systems. Let me just show you what I've got. So I created this form here using the lessons I learned from the video where I analyzed a bunch of different magic systems. So I'm going to be going through this entire list for both the magic systems, trying to answer each of these in detail. And through doing that, my goal is to get a really deep understanding of both of these magic systems so that I can compare the two and figure out what things are in common. So I'm going to start here with this first layer of analysis, and then when we finish, we'll be able to dive into some of the more broad structural aspects of magic as well. So I just reviewed all of Allomancy, and I went into a little bit more detail than I did in the last video reviewing magic systems, especially with regard to effects and abilities, and with regard to limitations, and with regard to balance. In balance, I looked at a few more variables like the frequency, duration, magnitude, area of effect, range, efficiency, that kind of stuff with regard to the magic, as well as some pitfalls like omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, and infinite wealth. So I used all those extra things to get a little bit more detail on the magic system, as well as to learn how Brandon Sanderson gets around some of these big problems that can be present in magic systems. So let's get into this and see what we can learn about Surge Binding. So I just went hard into figuring out the various aspects of Surge Binding as a magic system, and especially something that took a long time was the effects, because the effects are different for the different Surge Binders. Anyway, it's already about time for me to eat some breakfast, so I'm going to take a little bit of a break here, and when I come back, I'll be looking at the structural aspects of each of these magic systems so that I can compare them on that front as well. So I was just looking at the structure of both these magic systems and trying to compare them and try to figure out some similarities a little bit. And the next thing I want to do is just review all of this and see if I can pick out any final observations, any final similarities between the two magic systems that really show the way Brandon Sanderson likes to use magic. So I just finished up my analysis here of Brandon Sanderson's magic systems. I analyzed both of these and came out with some specific lessons that I'm going to use and apply to my own magic system tomorrow. And I'm actually really happy that I was able to complete this entire analysis today, because that means that I have 3 days remaining to work on my own magic system, and it's going to be quite a lot of work already, and I already know it's going to be intense, so having 3 full days should hopefully make that process a little bit easier. We'll see. So we're back, we've got the lessons from yesterday, and we are ready to actually start working on this magic system. You might be thinking that creating a magic system in 3 remaining days is near impossible, and you might be right about that. However, I'm not creating this from scratch. I already have a little bit of groundwork laid. I've been pondering these ideas for a couple months now, and I hope that this will give me the edge I need. But before we actually get started on adjusting the magic system to better fit the way Brandon Sanderson designs his magic systems, I think it makes sense to take a look at where I already am, what I've already got. The first thing that you need to know about this magic is that it is cooperative. And what I mean by cooperative is that I want the magic to be such that 2 humans must undergo this rite of passage together in order to activate their latent genetic ability to use the magic. And this rite of passage creates a spiritual bond between them, and the bond is what allows them to use the magic. If the bond is weakened, then their abilities are weakened. If it is broken, then their abilities to use the magic goes away. And I've also decided that there's going to be 2 different types of magic user, and these 2 different types will have different strengths and weaknesses that support each other, which further facilitates this cooperative nature of the magic. Another thing I did was brainstormed various magical abilities and also potential limitations that could be applied to it. I created a mind map of abilities and limitations for the magic, and this is actually where I got the idea of cooperative magic. So that is the starting point of the magic. I have some of the basics worked out. However, what I am lacking is a structure and organization to make this magic more understandable. I want it to feel more cohesive, and I also want the magic to be more effective for storytelling. One of the things I noticed about Brandon Sanderson's magic systems yesterday is that they're very flexible. He makes it so that the magic can be used creatively in various situations and be used to solve all sorts of problems in the story. And one thing that he actually warns of in Sanderson's laws is of having magic that is too brittle and that's only being used to solve, 1 or 2 problems in the story, because then that can feel like a little bit of a what's it called? I don't know how to pronounce that. Because if you're using it only in this limited way, it can feel a little bit like a Deus Ex Machina. And I wanted to work through this first because this is a very general step. This is going to build the foundations for the magic. This is where I'm going to decide what abilities can potentially be part of this magic. This is where I'm going to start brainstorming the problems that the characters might face and how they might use the magic to solve them. So what I'm going to do here is get started trying to brainstorm, trying to think of various problems that could occur in the story. First, we have survival-based problems. The fact they live in the tundra, it's already a harsh environment. It's already difficult to survive there. So I was trying to think about some of the main problems they face based on where they live. Things like staying warm enough, building shelter, finding food. The second problem, and the main reason why these peoples are trying to pursue the magic in the first place, is the external threats. This is the fact that there's a technologically advanced southern empire and is trying to go north and invade. So next, what I want to do is come up with some abilities that could potentially be used to solve a large subset of these problems. I finished narrowing down the abilities needed to solve most of these problems. So let's talk about the flexibility of this magic. These abilities are useful for surviving in the tundra, but also have some flexibility within them. So for instance, temperature control. The self-user has the ability to manipulate the temperature of their own body. So for instance, if they're in really harsh weather conditions, they can prevent themselves from getting hypothermia and they can survive these. With the other user, they have the ability to control the temperature of things outside of themselves. For example, this user could solve the same problem with the weather by creating shelter very quickly. For instance, they could change the temperature of some of the snow or ice around them on the ground, and then they would have a nice pit. Then they could freeze different sheets of the water within that trench and then pull it out and use it to create a roof, and voila, they have a quick shelter. So another thing Brandon Sanderson tries to do with his magic is to make sure that it's connected together structurally and feels cohesive. If we look at the magic system of Mistborn, the magic is well organized structurally in the first place, with the magical abilities being sorted into 4 different categories, and then within those being sorted into external abilities and internal external abilities and pushing abilities and pulling abilities. And all of this structure makes it easier to understand. And through these things, Brandon Sanderson is creating a cohesiveness to the magic. And that's something that I kind of stumbled into doing a little bit when I was working on making this magic flexible. So let me just show you what I have. So when I was trying to figure out how flexible these different abilities were, I realized that all of them were related to solving some sort of problem that would be a survival problem present for the nomadic people that lived in this tundra area. That maybe what could connect all of these abilities is the fact that these abilities are what was needed by the tundra peoples of the past to survive and thrive in this harsh environment. And the second way I tried to make it a little bit more cohesive was with the structure. And the way that I did this was by separating the magical abilities into two different types of users. One type of user is the self user who can only use the magic to change things relating to themselves. And the second type of user is the other user who can use the magic to manipulate things outside of themselves. Through using this structural organization and the theme, I'm hoping the magic will feel more cohesive. And the third lesson I learned studying Brandon Sanderson's magic systems was about how he uses limitations. And Brandon Sanderson, of course, in his second law, talks about how important limitations are and how they're more interesting than the actual abilities themselves. And you can see that in the way that he uses magic. He limits them in various ways. There are inherent limitations to some abilities, as well as added limitations or costs. So let's just talk about all of these here. First, inherent limitations. If you look at something like aluminum in allomancy, where you can burn aluminum and it clears all your stores of other metals, well, this is inherently limited because if you use aluminum one time, then it clears all the stores, and then if you use it again, nothing's going to happen. The other type of limitation he uses is the added limitation. So if we look at something like adhesive bonds in surge binding, if you bond something with something else, once the stormlight connecting them runs out, then the bond is broken. So this rule limits the ability to use this adhesion. And the third sort of thing he does is add costs. So for instance, in order to use surge binding, you have to have a bond with a sprint, and you have to live by the ideals of your specific order of radiant if you want to maintain this bond. So in order to be able to use the magic, you actually have to live in a specific way and in accordance with a specific set of values. So that's what I'm going to work on next, trying to add some of these costs, these limitations into my magic. So I just created a bunch of limits, and I also created some costs to make sure that the magic is not overpowered and that it's actually forcing the characters to use it in creative ways. I made sure that each ability had at least one limit on it. I'm not going to go into too much detail on these limits because every single ability has one and it would take a long time to read through them, but I do actually want to go into a little bit of detail for costs. First of all, the currency that's required to use the magic. Initially, I was planning on doing it in a very Brandon Sanderson style way, having external source with a connection to the economy of the society. However, I realized that it might make more sense for the external source to be tied in thematically to the cooperation of the two characters rather than the economy. So here's how this magical currency will work. First of all, there's a latent currency generated by the bond that the two users share. This is like a renewable source. Over time, there's more currency generated, and it generates at a static rate that might increase as the relationship and connection progresses. But even if you don't have this magical currency generated by the bond, you can still use the magic. However, there's some costs for that, and the magic users can only really use it together. The self user can use the magic indefinitely. However, this generates a residual energy. This energy will eventually grow to be lethal for the user if they continue to have it build up. The other user cannot use the magic without the magical currency unless this residual energy is available from the self user, and this will allow it to dissipate in the self user, making it safe. So the fourth thing that I learned when I was analyzing Brandon Sanderson's magic systems is that he really focuses hard on tying the magic into the world building. This is one of the things that definitely stands out when you look at the magic systems of allomancy and of surge binding. They both tie into the world and the natural environment very well. Another thing Brandon Sanderson really nails in the stories is tying the magic to the character arcs. There's some amazing moments in the Stormlight Archive, and these correspond with the characters improving their ability to use the magic. Just look at the arcs for Kaladin in the first and second book. Look at Dalinar's arc in the third book. These are just amazing. I love them so much. And this actually ties back into Sanderson's third law, which is about going deep rather than going wide. Brandon Sanderson argues by connecting the magic system with various aspects of the world, it'll be so much more satisfying and impactful in the story than if you just had like 10 shallow magic systems. With this in mind, I went deep, tying in the magic to the world building and character arcs. I think it actually went pretty well. I probably need to do some more work with this, but I got some interesting ideas. For instance, because both these societies are composed of what was one type of magic user, the values that somebody who uses those types of magic would naturally adopt carry over. So for instance, all of the genetic self users live in the East and they value things like strength, stoicism, and caring for the weak. And this maps directly over from their abilities where they were able to conserve energy, stoicism, where they're able to fortify themselves, strength, and part of their responsibility is taking care of their partner, since their partner can heal them, but not themselves. So that's one interesting part of the world building that I thought of. So I'm gonna call it here for the day. I've been brainstorming for, hours and hours already. My brain's starting to feel a little tired. So I think this is a good place to stop. And I'll be back tomorrow to continue with this fourth point of connecting the character arcs, connecting the world and the magic, and to continue with the rest of creating this magic system. And yesterday I was working on tying the magic system into the world building, into the story, into character arcs, and I didn't quite finish working on that yet, so I'm going to continue with that here today. And then we'll be moving on to another step, which is potentially the most time-consuming one. So let's just get started. I just went through and tried to connect magic to the two different cultures of the different tribal coalitions, and I really went deep on this, trying to connect the magic to everything that I could. I tried to connect it as much as possible to the cultures of these different societies, and I think I got some really interesting stuff here. I'll share a few little things, but there's quite a bit. Stemming from the different values that came from the magic users, we have different expressions of art in these two societies. So in the West, where they value beauty, there's a carving in the ice walls of the homes for every single member of the family, and when somebody comes of age, they get to decide what their own carving will be and are responsible for maintaining that carving in the walls of their home. In contrast, in the East, where they really heavily value strength and where the military tradition is much stronger, they have different martial arts. So these are different expressions of art in this society. I had a ton of fun just exploring all these things, and I didn't actually dig into character arcs and story anymore because I think I already figured out as much as I want to figure out about this. I want to focus on this stuff more when I'm actually plotting out the story. So when I get into plotting, I will make sure to connect the magic to these things because I love the way that that was done in various books in the Stormlight Archive. So next we're going to move on to the fifth thing that I learned from analyzing Brandon Sanderson's magic systems. He creates these really complicated magic systems, but he finds a way to have the understanding of the characters in the story be very simplified with regard to this magic. And that way, the reader can understand these simple elements first, and then over time, more and more of the magic is revealed. Look at the example of Mistborn. In the beginning, they only really understand a few of the medals, and these medals pertain to the members of the thieving crew, so it's easy to remember them, easy to get the reader up to speed on them. And then over time, we realize that their understanding of the magic was flawed, and there's more and more medals that are actually part of it. So as of now, my magic system is relatively simple. There's only 2 magic users and they only have 3 abilities each. Each of these abilities carries different rules with it, and that makes it more complicated. But even so, I feel like the magic is a little bit simple right now, and I would like to have more mystery around the magic. I would like to create more complexity and kind of hide those things away. So that is what I'm going to work on here. I'm going to work on trying to figure out more mysteries around the magic and some more unknowns. And I think that will make the system feel much more alive. So I spent a decent amount of time working on this 5th aspect of making the magic more complex, and it's actually coming along nicely. I don't want to reveal too much of this because it's going to factor into the entire overall arc of the story. I would like to write maybe a trilogy here with this series, and this part that I'm coming up with now will be a factor that ties into the overall story. So we're not going to talk about it too much, but I did end up creating some hidden aspects of this system, and these will be very much relevant to the story, and they'll end up being a big mystery about the magic. I do want to take a little bit more time to go through all this stuff and see if I can find other mysteries to add to the magic as well, but I'm going to do that when I get back. I'm ready to continue with this world building, and I might be able to finish this today, which is actually pretty cool. I'm not sure. I want to make sure that I'm doing this as well as I can, and if I need an extra day to finish up, then that's fine. But I've been making great progress, and what I want to do is just get started. So I'm going to try and see if I can find some more mysteries, try and see if I can find something else to make this a little bit more complex, something that I can reveal in later books. Let's see what I can figure out. So I just wrote a ton here and really worked out a lot of the mysteries around the magic, how the magic was created, how it came to be, and how it relates to the previous thing I figured out, which I don't want to give away because it's pretty darn cool. So, my computer just fell on me. Anyway, I'm feeling good about this. I think I might have a little bit more polishing of the magic system. I just want to go through, look over everything, and make sure that I'm proud of every single aspect of this, and that I think I have a solid foundation here. And then after that, we will be safe to say that we've created a magic system in the style of Brandon Sanderson. And today I want to put some final touch-ups on this magic system to really make it as good as I can. The main things that I want to do are make sure that this magic system has no sorts of flaws in balance. Second, I want to review each of these 5 points that I learned from studying Brandon Sanderson's magic systems, and I want to see if there's anything else that I have not done with regard to these lessons that I could do and that would improve the magic. And third, I want to look at some of the notes that I had when reviewing Brandon Sanderson's magic systems, because there were some notes that I took, and from those notes I created these 5 lessons. But I want to look at the actual foundations that created those lessons and see if I'm missing anything there, and then I will be done with the magic system. So let's just get started reviewing these balance aspects. So I just went through checking all of the aspects of balance, and this magic system is very limited. I was going through and it was pretty obvious that there weren't going to be any crazy things where characters could become omnipotent or omniscient or anything like that. So the balance aspect is verified. I was pretty sure that it was already good, but now I know. And next I'm going to move on to looking through all 5 of these lessons and making sure that the magic system is still fitting them after having gone through all 5. So I just went through for all 5 categories to check that all of them are still working. The main one that I really had to add to was figuring out how the magic ties in the world building. And this is because in the process of making the magic more complex, I had some other stuff that I had left untouched. Also, I needed to do a little bit more work on limitations, given the mysterious aspects of the magic I added in the last step. So now I've gone through for all of these steps again, and I feel like a lot of this detail about the magic has been figured out. However, I do still want to go through all the notes I had after studying Brandon Sanderson's magic systems and just verify that these more high-level points are working too. So first, let's look at some of these notes. Actually, now that I'm looking at these, I did already include all of them except for one into these 5 points. The only one that I didn't include was for both systems having a character who represents each magical ability and makes it easier to understand and remember. So if you look at Mistborn, we have the different members of the crew, each of them having one misting ability, and making those abilities tied to a person, therefore easier to remember. But I don't think it's as necessary with my magic system because there's not so many different types of users. There's only 2 different types of users, and I already have plans for both of them as protagonists in the story, so I'm already including this aspect by default. I think that I've finished here creating this magic system. I'm really happy with what I've been able to do here. Obviously, I didn't really finish it in 4 days because I've spent months just thinking about these things and getting some ideas flowing, but in these 4 days I made a ton of progress, and I'm really happy that I've been able to do this because, let's be real, Brandon Sanderson has my favorite magic systems. I love the way he uses magic in stories, and that's why I wanted to try and emulate his magic with my own. Before these last few days, I couldn't have told you much about creating a magic system. Despite having watched videos, read books, and listened to podcasts about this, I learned more about magic systems in the last few days than I had all the way up until this point. And now, I'm excited to make the magic come alive in my next series.